Chapter 13. The War Years. The first shock and then the first optimism. The Battle of the Marne, the Russian steamroller, Kitchener. Do you think it will last long, sir? Chips, questioned as he watched the first trial game of the season, gave quite a cheery answer. He was, like thousands of others, hopelessly wrong. But unlike thousands of others, he did not afterward conceal the fact. We ought to have finished it by Christmas. The Germans are already beaten. But why? Are you thinking of joining up Forrester? Joke, because Forrester was the smallest boy Brookfield had ever had, about 4 feet high above his muddy football boots, but not so much a joke when you came to think of it afterward, for he was killed in 1918, shot down in flames over Cambrai. But one didn't guess what lay ahead. It seemed tragically sensational when the first old Brookfieldian was killed in action, in September. Chips thought when the news came, 100 years ago, boys from this school were fighting against the French. Strange in a way that the sacrifices of one generation should so cancel out those of another. He tried to express this to Blades, the head of schoolhouse. But Blades, 18 years old and already in training for a cadetship, only laughed. What had all that history stuff to do with it anyhow? Just old Chips with one of his queer ideas, that's all. 1915. Armies clenched in deadlock from the sea to Switzerland. The Dardanelles, Gallipoli, military camps springing up quite near Brookfield. Soldiers using the playing fields for sports and training. Swift developments of Brookfield OTC. Most of the younger masters gone or in uniform. Every Sunday night in the chapel after evening service, Chatteris read out the names of old boys killed together with short biographies. Very moving, but Chips in the black pew under the gallery thought they were only names to him. He doesn't see their faces as I do. 1916. The Somme Battle. 23 names read out one Sunday evening. Toward the close of that catastrophic July, Chatteris talked to Chips one afternoon at Mrs. Wickett's. He was overworked and overworried and looked very ill. To tell you the truth, Chipping, I'm not having too easy a time here. I'm 39, and unmarried, and lots of people seem to think they know what I ought to do. Also, I happen to be diabetic and couldn't pass the blindest MO. But I don't see why I should pin a medical certificate on my front door. Chips hadn't known anything about this. It was a shock to him, for he liked Chatteris. The latter continued. You see how it is. Ralston filled the place up with young men, all very good, of course. But now most of them have joined up, and the substitutes are pretty dreadful on the whole. They poured ink down a man's neck in prep one night last week. Silly fool. Got hysterical. I have to take classes myself, take prep for fools like that, work till midnight every night, and get cold-shouldered as a slacker on top of everything. I can't stand it much longer. If things don't improve next term, I shall have a breakdown. I do sympathize with you, Chip said. I hoped you would. And that brings me to what I came here to ask you. Briefly, my suggestion is that if you felt equal to it and would care to, how about coming back here for a while? You look pretty fit, and of course you know all the ropes. I don't mean a lot of hard work for you. You needn't take anything strenuously. Just a few odd jobs here and there as you choose. What I'd like you for more than anything else is not for the actual work you do, though naturally that would be very valuable, but for your help in other ways, and just belonging here. There's nobody ever been more popular than you were, and are still. You'd help to hold things together if there were any danger of them flying to bits. And perhaps there is that danger. Chips answered breathlessly with a holy joy in his heart. I'll come. Chapter 14. He still kept on his rooms with Mrs. Wickett. Indeed, he still lived there. But every morning, about 10:30, he put on his coat and muffler and crossed the road to the school. He felt very fit, and the actual work was not taxing. Just a few forms in Latin and Roman history. The old lessons, even in the old pronunciation. The same joke about the lex canolea. There was a new generation that had not heard it, and he was absurdly gratified by the success it achieved. He felt a little like a music hall favorite returning to the boards after a positively last appearance. They all said how marvelous it was that he knew every boy's name and face so quickly. They did not guess how closely he had kept in touch from across the road. He was a grand success altogether. In some strange way he did, and they all knew and felt it, help things. For the first time in his life he felt necessary, and necessary to something that was nearest his heart. There was no sublimer feeling in the world, and it was his at last. He made new jokes, too, about the OTC and the food rationing system and the anti-air raid blinds that had to be fitted on all the windows. There was a mysterious kind of ristle that began to appear on the school menu on Mondays, and Chips called it aberhendum, meant to be abhorred. The story went round. Heard Chips' latest? Chatteris fell ill during the winter of 17, and again for the second time in his life, Chips became acting head of Brookfield. Then in April, Chatteris died. and the governors asked Chips if he would carry on for the duration. He said he would if they would refrain from appointing him officially. From that last honor, within reach at last, he shrank instinctively, feeling himself in so many ways unequal to it. He said to Rivers, "You see, I'm not a young man, and I don't want people to, expect a lot from me. I'm like all these new colonels and majors you see everywhere. Just a wartime fluke. A rancor. That's all I am, really." 1917. 1918. Chips lived through it all. He sat in the headmaster's study every morning, handling problems, dealing with plaints and requests. Out of vast experience had emerged a kindly, gentle confidence in himself. To keep a sense of proportion, that was the main thing. So much of the world was losing it. As well keep it where it had or ought to have a congenial home. On Sundays in chapel, it was he now who read out the tragic list. And sometimes it was seen and heard that he was in tears over it. Well, why not, the school said. He was an old man. They might have despised anyone else for the weakness. One day he got a letter from Switzerland from friends there. It was heavily censored, but conveyed some news. On the following Sunday, after the names and biographies of the old boys, he paused a moment and then added, "Those few of you who were here before the war will remember Max Stiefel, the German master. He was in Germany visiting his home when war broke out. He was popular while he was here and made many friends. Those who knew him will be sorry to hear that he was killed last week on the Western Front. He was a little pale when he sat down afterward, aware that he had done something unusual. He had consulted nobody about it anyhow. No one else could be blamed. Later, outside the chapel, he heard an argument. On the Western Front, Chip said. Does that mean he was fighting for the Germans? I suppose it does. Seems funny then to read his name out with all the others. After all, he was an enemy. Oh, just one of Chip's ideas, I expect. The old boy still has him. Chip's in his room again was not displeased by the comment. Yes, he still had him, those ideas of dignity and generosity that were becoming increasingly rare in a frantic world. And he thought, Brookfield will take them too from me. But it wouldn't from anyone else. Once, when asked for his opinion of bayonet practice being carried on near the cricket pavilion, he answered with that lazy, slightly asthmatic intonation that had been so often and so extravagantly imitated. It seems, to me, a very vulgar way of killing people. The yarn was passed on and joyously appreciated. How Chips had told some big brass hat from the War Office that bayonet fighting was vulgar. Just like Chips. And they found an adjective for him. An adjective just beginning to be used. He was pre-war. Chapter 15. And once, on a night of full moonlight, the air raid warning was given while Chips was taking his lower fourth in Latin. The guns began almost instantly, and as there was plenty of shrapnel falling about outside, it seemed to Chips that they might just as well stay where they were on the ground floor of Schoolhouse. It was pretty solidly built and made as good a dugout as Brookfield could offer. And as for a direct hit, well, they could not expect to survive that wherever they were. So he went on with his Latin, speaking a little louder amid the reverberating crashes of the guns and the shrill whine of anti-aircraft shells. Some of the boys were nervous. Few were able to be attentive. He said gently, "It may possibly seem to you, Robertson, at this particular moment in the world's history, that the affairs of Caesar and Gaul some 2,000 years ago are of somewhat secondary importance, and that the irregular conjugation of the verb tolo is even less important still. But believe me, my dear Robertson, that is not really the case." Just then there came a particularly loud explosion, quite near. You cannot judge the importance of things by the noise they make. Oh dear me, no. A little chuckle. And these things that have mattered for thousands of years are not going to be snuffed out because some stink merchant in his laboratory invents a new kind of mischief. Titters of nervous laughter. For Buffles, the pale, lean, and medically unfit science master was nicknamed the stink merchant. Another explosion, nearer still. Let us resume our work. If it is fate that we are to be interrupted, let us be found employing ourselves in something really appropriate. Is there anyone who will volunteer to construe? Maynard, chubby, dauntless, clever, and impudent, said, "I will, sir." Very good. Turn to page 40 and begin at the bottom line. The explosion still continued deafeningly. The whole building shook as if it were being lifted off its foundations. Maynard found the page, which was some way ahead, and began shrilly. Genus hoc erat pugnae. This was the kind of fight, quosa Germani exequerant, in which the Germans busied themselves. Oh, sir, that's good. That's really very funny indeed, sir. One of your best. Laughing began, and Chips added, "Well, you can see now that these dead languages can come to life again, sometimes, eh? Eh?" Afterward, they learned that 5 bombs had fallen in and around Brookfield. the nearest of them just outside the school grounds. 9 persons had been killed. The story was told, retold, embellished. The dear old boy never turned a hair. He even found some old tag to illustrate what was going on. Something in Caesar about the way the Germans fought. You wouldn't think there were things like that in Caesar, would you? And the way Chips laughed, you know the way he does laugh, the tears all running down his face. Never seen him laugh so much. He was legend. With his old and tattered gown, his walk that was just beginning to break into a stumble, his mild eyes peering over the steel-rimmed spectacles, and his quaintly humorous sayings, Brookfield would not have had an atom of him different. November 11th, 1918. News came through in the morning. A whole holiday was decreed for the school, and the kitchen staff were implored to provide as cheerful a spread as wartime rationing permitted. There was much cheering and singing and a bread fight across the dining hall. When Chips entered the midst of the uproar, there was an instant hush, and then wave upon wave of cheering. Everyone gazed on him with eager shining eyes as on a symbol of victory. He walked to the dais, seeming as if he wished to speak. They made silence for him, but he shook his head after a moment, smiled, and walked away again. It had been a damp, foggy day, and the walk across the quadrangle to the dining hall had given him a chill. The next day he was in bed with bronchitis and stayed there till after Christmas. But already, on that night of November 11th, after his visit to the dining hall, he had sent in his resignation to the Board of Governors. When the school reassembled after the holidays, he was back at Mrs. Wickett's. At his own request, there were no more farewells or presentations. Nothing but a handshake with his successor, and the word acting crossed out on official stationery. The duration was over. Chapter 16. And now, 15 years after that, he could look back upon it all with a deep and sumptuous tranquility. He was not ill, of course, only a little tired at times and bad with his breathing during the winter months. He would not go abroad. He had once tried it, but had chanced to strike the Riviera during one of its carefully unadvertised cold spells. "I prefer to get my chills in my own country," he used to say after that. He had to take care of himself when there were east winds, but autumn and winter were not really so bad. There were warm fires and books, and he could look forward to the summer. It was the summer that he liked best, of course. Apart from the weather, which suited him, there were continual visits by old boys. Every weekend, some of them motored up to Brookfield and called at his house. Sometimes they tired him if too many came at once, but he did not really mind. He could always rest and sleep afterward, and he enjoyed their visits more than anything else in the world that was still to be enjoyed. "Well, Gregson, I remember you, always late for everything, eh? Perhaps you'll be late and growing old, like me, eh?" And later, when he was alone again and Mrs. Wickett came in to clear away the tea things. Mrs. Wickett, young Gregson called. You remember him, do you? Tall boy with spectacles. Always late. Got a job with the League of Nations, where I suppose his dilatoriness won't be noticeable, eh? And sometimes when the bell rang for call over, he would go to the window and look across the road and over the school fence and see in the distance the thin line of boys filing past the bench. New times, new names, but the old ones still remained. Jefferson, Jennings, Jolyon, Jupp, Kingsley Primus, Kingsley Secundus, Kingsley Tertius, Kingston. Where are you all? Where have you gone to? Mrs. Wickett, bring me a cup of tea just before prep, will you please? The post-war decade swept through with a clatter of change and maladjustments. Chips, as he lived through it, was profoundly disappointed when he looked abroad. The Ruhr, Shanach, Corfu. There was enough to be uneasy about in the world. But near him at Brookfield, and even in a wider sense in England, there was something that charmed his heart because it was old, and had survived. More and more he saw the rest of the world as a vast disarrangement for which England had sacrificed enough, and perhaps too much. But he was satisfied with Brookfield. It was rooted in things that had stood the test of time and change and war. Curious in this deeper sense, how little it had changed. Boys were a politer race. Bullying was non-existent. There was more swearing and cheating. There was a more genuine friendliness between master and boy. Less pomposity on the one side, less unctuousness on the other. One of the new masters, fresh from Oxford, even let the sixth call him by his Christian name. Chips didn't hold with that. Indeed, he was just a little bit shocked. He might as well sign his terminal reports. Yours affectionately, eh? He told somebody. During the general strike of 1926, Brookfield boys loaded motor vans with foodstuffs. When it was all over, Chips felt stirred emotionally as he had not been since the war. Something had happened, something whose ultimate significance had yet to be reckoned. But one thing was clear. England had burned her fire in her own grate again. And when at his speech day function that year, an American visitor laid stress on the vast sums that the strike had cost the country. Chips answered, "Yes, but advertisement always is costly." Advertisement? Well, wasn't it advertisement? And very fine advertisement, too. A whole week of it, and not a life lost, not a shot fired. Your country would have spilt more blood in raiding a single liquor saloon. Laughter. Laughter. Wherever he went and whatever he said, there was laughter. He had earned the reputation of being a great jester, and jests were expected of him. Whenever he rose to speak at a meeting, or even when he talked across a table, people prepared their minds and faces for the joke. They listened in a mood to be amused, and it was easy to satisfy them. They laughed sometimes before he came to the point. Old Chips was in fine form, they would say afterward. Marvelous the way he can always see the funny side of things. After 1929, Chips did not leave Brookfield, even for old boys' dinners in London. He was afraid of chills, and late nights began to tire him too much. He came across to the school, however, on fine days, and he still kept up a wide and continual hospitality in his room. His faculties were all unimpaired, and he had no personal worries of any kind. His income was more than he needed to spend, and his small capital, invested in gilt-edged stocks, did not suffer when the slump set in. He gave a lot of money away, to people who called on him with a hard luck story, to various school funds, and also to the Brookfield Mission. In 1930, he made his will. Except for legacies to the mission and to Mrs. Wickett, he left all he had to found an open scholarship to the school. 1931, 1932. What do you think of Hoover, sir? Do you think we shall ever go back to gold? How do you feel about things in general, sir? See any break in the clouds? When's the tide going to turn, Chips, old boy? You ought to know with all your experience of things. They all asked him questions as if he were some kind of prophet and encyclopedia combined. More even than that, for they liked their answer dished up as a joke. He would say, "Well, Henderson, when I was a much younger man, there used to be someone who promised people 9 pence for 4 pence. I don't know that anybody ever got it, but our present rulers seem to have solved the problem how to give 4 pence for 9 pence." Laughter. Sometimes when he was strolling about the school, small boys of the cheekier kind would ask him questions, merely for the fun of getting Chips's latest to retail. "Please, sir, what about the 5-year plan? Sir, do you think Germany wants to fight another war? Have you been to the new cinema, sir? I went with my people the other day. Quite a grand affair for a small place like Brookfield. They've got a Wurlitzer." "And what on earth is a Wurlitzer?" "It's an organ, sir, a cinema organ. Dear me, I've seen the name on the boardings, but I always imagined it must be some kind of sausage." Laughter. "Oh, there's a new Chips joke, you fellas, a perfectly lovely one. I was gassing to the old boy about the cinema, and..." Chapter 17. He sat in his front parlor at Mrs. Wickett's on a November afternoon in '33. It was cold and foggy, and he dare not go out. He had not felt too well since Armistice Day. He fancied he might have caught a slight chill during the chapel service. Merivale had been that morning for his usual fortnightly chat. Everything all right? Feeling hearty? That's the style. Keep indoors this weather. There's a lot of flu about. Wish I could have your life for a day or two. His life. And what a life it had been. The whole pageant of it swung before him as he sat by the fire that afternoon. The things he had done and seen. Cambridge in the '60s, Great Gable on an August morning, Brookfield at all times and seasons throughout the years. And for that matter, the things he had not done and would never do now that he had left them too late. He had never traveled by air, for instance, and he had never been to a talkie show, so that he was both more and less experienced than the youngest new boy at the school might well be, and that paradox of age and youth was what the world called progress. Mrs. Wickett had gone out, visiting relatives in a neighborly village. She had left the tea things ready on the table, with bread and butter and extra cups laid out in case anybody called. On such a day, however, visitors were not very likely. With the fog thickening hourly outside, he would probably be alone. But no. About 3:45 a ring came, and Chips, answering the front door himself, which he oughtn't to have done, encountered a rather small boy wearing a Brookfield cap and an expression of anxious timidity. "Please, sir," he began, "does Mr. Chips live here?" "You'd better come inside," Chips answered. And in his room a moment later he added, "I am the person you want. Now what can I do for you?" "I was told you wanted me, sir." Chips smiled. An old joke. An old leg pull, and he of all people, having made so many old jokes in his time, ought not to complain. And it amused him to cap their joke, as it were, with one of his own, to let them see that he could keep up his end even yet. So he said with eyes twinkling, "Quite right, my boy. I wanted you to take tea with me. Will you sit down by the fire?" I don't think I've seen your face before. How is that? I've only just come out of the sanatorium, sir. I've been there since the beginning of term with measles. Ah, that accounts for it. Chips began his usual ritualistic blending of tea from the different caddies. Luckily, there was half a walnut cake with pink icing in the cupboard. He found out that the boy's name was Linford, that he lived in Shropshire, and that he was the first of his family at Brookfield. You know, Linford, you'll like Brookfield, when you get used to it. It's not half such an awful place as you imagine. You're a bit afraid of it, yes? So was I, dear boy, at first. But that was a long time ago. 63 years ago, to be precise. When I first went to Big Hall and I saw all those boys, I tell you, I was quite scared. Indeed, I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. Not even when the Germans bombed us during the war. But it didn't last long. The scared feeling, I mean. I soon made myself at home. Were there a lot of other new boys that term, sir? Asked Linford shyly. But God bless my soul, I wasn't a boy at all. I was a young man of 22. And the next time you see a young man, a master, taking his first prep in Big Hall, just think what it feels like. But if you were 22 then, sir? Yes, You must be very old now, sir. Chips laughed quietly and steadily to himself. It was a good joke. Well, I'm certainly no chicken. He laughed quietly to himself for a long time. Then he talked of other matters, of Shropshire, of schools and school life in general, of the news in that day's papers. You're growing up into a very cross sort of world, Linford. Maybe it will have got over some of its crossness by the time you're ready for it. Let's hope, at any rate. Well, and with a glance at the clock, he delivered himself of his old familiar formula. I am sorry you can't stay. At the front door he shook hands. Goodbye, my boy. And the answer came in a shrill treble. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Chip sat by the fire again with those words echoing along the corridors of his mind. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. An old leg pull to make new boys think that his name was really Chips. The joke was almost traditional. He did not mind. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. He remembered that on the eve of his wedding day, Kathy had used the same phrase, mocking him gently for the seriousness he had had in those days. He thought, nobody could call me serious today, that's for certain. Suddenly, the tears began to roll down his cheeks. An old man's failing. Silly, perhaps, but he couldn't help it. He felt very tired. Talking to Linford like that had quite exhausted him. But he was glad he had met Linford. Nice boy. Would do well. Over the fog-laden air came the Belfer call-over, tremulous and muffled. Chips looked at the window, graying into twilight. It was time to light up. But as soon as he began to move, he felt that he couldn't. He was too tired. And anyhow, it didn't matter. He leaned back in his chair. No chicken. Well, that was true enough. And it had been amusing about Linford. A neat score off the jokers who had sent the boy over. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Odd enough that he should have said it just like that. Chapter 18. When he awoke, for he seemed to have been asleep, he found himself in bed, and Merivale was there stooping over him and smiling. Well, you old ruffian, feeling all right? That was a fine shock you gave us. Chips murmured after a pause, and in a voice that surprised him by its weakness. Why, what has happened? Merely that you threw a faint. Mrs. Wickett came in and found you. Lucky she did. You're all right now. Take it easy. Sleep again if you feel inclined. He was glad someone had suggested such a good idea. He felt so weak that he wasn't even puzzled by the details of the business, how they had got him upstairs, what Mrs. Wickett had said, and so on. But then suddenly, at the other side of the bed, he saw Mrs. Wickett. She was smiling. He thought, God bless my soul, what's she doing up here? And then in the shadows behind Merivale, he saw Cartwright, the new head. He thought of him as new, even though he had been at Brookfield since 1919. And old Buffles, commonly called Roddy. Funny the way they were all here. He felt, anyhow, I can't be bothered to wonder why about anything. I'm going to go to sleep. But it wasn't sleep, and it wasn't quite wakefulness either. It was a sort of in-between state, full of dreams and faces and voices, old scenes and old scraps of tunes. A Mozart trio that Kathy had once played in, cheers and laughter and the sound of guns. And over it all, Brookfield bells, Brookfield bells. So you see, if Miss Plebs wanted Mr. Patrician to marry her, yes you can, you liar. Joke. Me to be abhorred. Joke. That you, Max? Yes, come in. What's the news from the fatherland? Oh, mihi prateritos. Ralston said I was slack and inefficient. but you couldn't manage without me. O nobile hedes ago fortibo assassinaro. Can you translate that, any of you? It's a joke. Once he heard them talking about him in the room. Cartwright was whispering to Merivale. Poor old chap, must have lived a lonely sort of life all by himself. Merivale answered, Not always by himself. He married, you know. Oh, did he? I never knew about that. She died. It must have been, quite 30 years ago. More possibly. Pity. Pity he never had any children. And at that, Chips opened his eyes as wide as he could and sought to attract their attention. It was hard for him to speak out loud, but he managed to murmur something. And they all looked round and came nearer to him. He struggled slowly with his words. What was that, you were saying about me just now? Old Buffles smiled and said, Nothing at all, old chap, nothing at all. We were just wondering when you were going to wake up out of your beauty sleep. But, I heard you. You were talking about me. Absolutely nothing of any consequence, my dear fellow. Really, I give you my word. I thought I heard you, one of you, saying it was a pity I never had any children, eh? But I have, you know. I have. The others smiled without answering, and after a pause, Chips began a faint and palpitating chuckle. Yes, I have, he added, with quavering merriment. Thousands of them, and all boys. And then the chorus sang in his ears in final harmony, more grandly and sweetly than he had ever heard it before, and more comfortingly, too. Pettifer, Pollitt, Porson, Potts, Pullman, Purvis, Pym Wilson, Radlett, Rapson, Reed, Reaper, Reddy Primus. Come round me now, all of you, for a last word and a joke. Harper, Haslett, Hatfield, Heatherly. My last joke. Did you hear it? Did it make you laugh? Bone, Boston, Bovey, Bradford, Bradley, Bramhall Anderson. Wherever you are, whatever has happened, give me this moment with you. This last moment, my boys. And soon Chips was asleep. He seemed so peaceful that they did not disturb him to say good night. But in the morning, as the school bell sounded for breakfast, Brookfield had the news. Brookfield will never forget his lovableness, said Cartwright in his speech to the school, which was absurd, because all things are forgotten in the end. But Linford, at any rate, will remember and tell the tale. I said goodbye to Chips the night before he died. The End. You have been listening to Goodbye, Mr. Chips, written by James Hilton, narrated by Daniel Natal.